Got to step up my game
I,
now.
I need all the help I can get. Yeah.
How you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. It's a dope hat you got.
Hey, thank you.
Before we do anything important here, is it Skiggs or Skaggs? Your last name?
Skaggs.
Skaggs. So I was wrong on both times.
I think it's more the Minnesota accent and pronunciation. We always, and I got to catch myself because I always say like bag. Well, it's bag, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Yeah. It's that
so yeah, and
proximity to Canada that gets you.
yeah, exactly. Yep. So, yeah, so I mean, my whole life it's always been Skaggs, but some people call it Skaggs. It's whatever you want to call me.
But it is spelled Skaggs. Like it's spelled with an A, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I've heard people say like I heard one other person say Skaggs, but I felt like you were saying more like Skiggs or Skeggs or something like that. So anyway,
Okay, gotcha.
I do want to
Yeah,
say it's a
it's
dope name. Terry Skeggs like sounds like maybe like a country music star or something like that. It's kind of got that vibe to it.
yeah, well, there's Ricky Skaggs, if
See,
you
I don't even
know
know who that
him.
is.
Okay, yeah, he's like a country bluegrass singer, and I get asked all the time, "Am I related to him?" And I don't think I
Oh,
am,
that's hilarious.
unfortunately. Yeah, and I think he's saved. I think he's a pretty strong believer, actually. So, I
That's
don't know.
awesome.
Yeah,
You should reach out to him for the podcast and pretend you're like related.
yeah, dude,
And then
I'm like
once you
your
get in there, just be like, oh, I
I'm
found
your
out we're not related, man. Sorry about that. Well, you want to do the podcast anyway?
right, like I'm your third cousin twice removed or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me go ahead and officially kind of kick this off. And I do want to welcome the listeners. Thank you guys so much for taking a moment to check out this episode, this conversation with my new friend, Terry Skeggs. And Terry is a marriage and family therapist, really with an enormous passion for bringing hope and healing into people's lives. He's also the host of the podcast Testimonies with Terry, where he interviews people about their life story, sharing how their faith in Jesus Christ has turned their struggles into victories and testimonies. And man, you and we got connected through a mutual friend, Trevor Tyson, who we both interviewed on our podcast. And I found out we both interviewed Britt Eaton on our podcast as well. I found out you did an episode with her, and it's just cool to kind of have those mutual connections, And I'm grateful for Trevor. Trev, if you happen to be listening to this, thank you for making this possible. And again, Terry, thanks so much for your time and just for being with me today. I'm stoked for what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, man, I'm excited too. And again, shout out to Trevor. He's like the master networker and he's amazing. So shout out to
Yeah,
him and I'm pumped to be on the show.
yeah, man, yeah, for real. Yeah, thanks again, Trev. Yeah, that dude is another level of
Yeah,
just awesome and compassion and everything. Very, very cool.
he's legit.
Um, yeah. Well, dude, I would love it if we could kind of go to the beginning for a few minutes. I'd love to know. Well, first of all, I know you just mentioned Minnesota. Is that where you grew up? Did you grow up in that area or?
Yep, I grew up in a small town called Foley. Not a whole lot to it. It's kind of your typical small town, country town. I think it's probably most notable for the county jail being directly in front of the school. The I know that the elementary, intermediate, and high schools are all connected together, and the county jail is like right in front of it.
They're just sending a message. They're like, you guys are basically going directly from the school to the jail. Like at least
Exactly.
20% of you guys.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm not sure why they
Just a good
built it
self-esteem
that
boost.
way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, just kind of your typical average small town, country town. Grew up with my mom and dad and my three sisters. I'm the only boy in the family, and just kind of lived your, small town life.
That's awesome, man. Did you guys grow up? Like, were you in a Christian home? Did you guys go to church or did that come later on?
Yeah, so I grew up Catholic and we would go to church we'd usually go Saturday night mass and then I would do like the religion classes or faith formation
Mm-hmm.
classes. Wednesday nights, and I would go through, First Communion and confirmation and all that stuff, but never had a relationship with Jesus. I would spend
Yeah.
the whole time in mass in my mind, like growing up, Kiss was my favorite band, and I would spend the whole mass like going through the whole album in my head. I'm a drummer, I play
Mhm.
the drums, and so I would just like kind of go through the whole album in my head to get through the hour because it was so boring and repetitive. And I just didn't have that relationship with God. But I am thankful that I grew up going to a Catholic church because it did set a foundation, just the moral foundation and just having somewhat of an idea of who
Yeah.
God was. But that relationship with God didn't come until I was in college, and I was really struggling with, a couple different things: an eating disorder, depression, anxiety,
Mm.
and one of my friends in my one of my college classes invited me to a Bible study, and I figured, okay, sure. I never read the Bible before, but I figured I'd go, and I walked in there, and what really stood out to me was that everyone was so nice, like genuinely nice, and they all seemed to talk about Jesus like they knew him. And I
Mm.
thought that in my mind, I thought, "Well, that's
That's
kinda
cool.
weird," but there was also part of me that wanted that for myself. And
Yeah.
so, man, I just dug into it, and, I think November 7th, 2010 is when I gave my life to the Lord.
Man, man, that's so cool. And there's actually like a ton to unpack there, and I want to circle back to a few things, but you mentioned some of your music choices and the fact that you're a drummer. And I wanted to ask you, I was thinking about it because the your podcast intro music is heavier than the typical, podcast intro music that's out there. So I was just curious anyway, like what kind of music you're into. I figured just based on that, because I figured like you're I would imagine that you're into heavier music because I figured I figured you probably wouldn't put, like, your heaviest taste in music for your podcast, and anyway, it's just, like, this inner conversation that I had. I'm just curious, like, what kind of music are you into these days?
Yeah, I mean, I'm into pretty much anything as long as it has a good beat, but definitely rock is my home. All genres of rock, metal, metalcore, classic rock. I grew up really on like 80s hair metal, Kiss, Def
Nice.
Leppard, those kind of bands,
Yeah.
and that's still probably like my favorite music. Now the lyrics to those songs aren't, the greatest, but the music, I know there's something about it, and that's why I chose that song for my intro because it just kind of had to me, it kinda had, like, that Def Leppardy vibe where there's a little bit of, like, that soft pop rocky feel to it, and there's still a little bit of a punch there too. But man, mostly rock. I really got into, GFM, Gold, Frankincense, and Myrrh this
Mm.
year. My Apple Music said that they were my most listened to band, and, unfortunately, they just disbanded, but, Maggie English, I had her on my show, she's going solo as Magdalene Rose, and so I'm super pumped for that.
Oh, that's cool.
Skillet, Disciple, Striper, I love Striper. Yeah, man, rock is definitely where
Yeah.
I camp out with my music taste.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, dude, Striper. For some reason I never got into Striper like when I was growing up. Like when I was in high schools when I started getting into the more like heavier stuff and I started going to shows kind of in my probably junior senior year. I started going to concerts and, we'd go like I lived in New Jersey and I was about an hour from Philly, and so every once in a while, like a couple of friends of mine that could drive or whatever, like we'd hop in a car and we'd drive to Philly and go check out some bands and stuff like that. And I got really kind of into the music scene for a while, and I was at shows like every weekend, like as often as I could be. And I got into some like really heavy stuff as well. But for some reason, like I always heard the name Striper, and they're kind of like the original Christian metal band. And like,
Yeah,
and I never really gravitated toward them until more recently, honestly, is when I started checking them out. But anyway, that's cool, man. I figured we were kind of like kindred spirits on on
for
the
sure,
music
man,
side of things. Yeah.
for sure. I love it.
I'm curious, man. So you mentioned like going to and I'm just asking this out of curiosity because I really don't know on like those um I forget what you called it, like those in the Catholic kind of training developmental classes and things like that that you were taking.
Yeah.
Do you find that those were they helpful, like, as far as now? Like, were you learning did you learn things in those classes that, translated very well? Like, were they teaching you the Bible? Were they teaching you things? I know you mentioned that, there was a good foundation that was formed in you. Just curious about what kind of things you were being taught in those classes and how it translates to, where you are today and to, ultimately, like having that theological foundation. Did it translate that way for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we never actually like read the Bible in religion class or faith formation class, whatever you want to call it. They would just have like these workbooks and they would have all these different lessons in it. I think
Mm,
what really stood out to me was we would have to like memorize prayers. So like in the Catholic Church, that's kind of a big thing with, and even just like memorizing the 10 commandments and they have like their seven sacraments and things like that. And so I think just memorizing some of those things, especially like the 10 commandments, I think that's what really set that foundation because even though I didn't have that relationship with Christ, I had that kind of that foundation of just like moral good and wrong, or what's bad and what's good. And so I think that played a role throughout my life. It's kind of cool as you bring this up. I'm just, I feel like the Holy Spirit's just bringing this up to me. Like looking back at like my time in high school, I was kind of the one guy in the group who what was kind of the cautious one and wouldn't get into as much trouble as the other ones where, they kind of threw caution to the wind, and I always kinda had that, like now looking back at it, I feel like, it was the Holy Spirit, but just always kind of, like, kinda protecting me and giving me that discernment on, I wouldn't go to that party if I were you. I remember there was
mm.
actually a party I was planning on going, but I felt like I wasn't supposed to go, and the cops actually busted that party, in high school, and so, the Lord's hand has definitely been on me even before I knew him. And yeah, it's just crazy to think that that's the love of the Father, right? Like even though I wasn't actively living for him, that his love for me is so big that he still protected me in that in those
Wow.
moments. It's awesome to think about.
Wow, that's so cool. I had a different kind of a upbringing. So, like, I grew up in a Christian home, always went to church as long as I can remember, all that kind of stuff. But like I remember specifically as a teenager, even as a kid before I got to my teenage years, and then definitely as a teenager, I remember struggling a lot just with condemnation. And I had something similar, but maybe more in a twisted way, where I actually did end up staying away from a lot of things because I had like this incredible fear on me that I was gonna like ruin my life or I was gonna disappoint God, or I felt like I was disappointment to God anyway, even when I was trying to do the right things, And so I know that a lot of times kind of living with that condemnation, and I can't even say that it was something that was preached at me. I think there were elements. I grew up in a for sure Pentecostal atmosphere, and we'd go to a lot of different churches and conferences and things like that, and there was definitely some condemnational, kind of teaching and stuff like that that was basically just kind of typical of the Pentecostal, movement of those days of the 90s and early 2000s. But I can't say that I took it to a totally another level, let me just say that. But I know that that kind of thing, like living under that kind of, guilt and condemnation and stuff for so long, it usually has a really, I mean, it had a terrible effect on my mind and on my psyche and how I felt. And, I always just felt, again, like I was a disappointment to God. I felt like that translated into feeling like I was just disappointing in general and all that kind of stuff. But like somehow I did allow it. The one good thing that I would say about it is I did allow it to somehow like insulate me. I did have struggles as a teenager and I did get into some sin stuff, but I never got into drinking, I never did drugs, I never even like smoked a cigarette, I never got into like, sex or anything like that. I just always kind of was so afraid of certain things, and then it kind of like sustained me. It kind of felt like not looking back, it's kind of like the process of the law, like how the law was this kind of condemnational thing, but it was valuable to sustain the people of God until the time of grace. And so
Yeah,
eventually when I got into my, maybe late, 1920, and I really started to kind of have encounters with God and with his grace, and a lot of that junk started to get peeled off of me. It's a long story. Sorry, I didn't intend to do this, but
you're good,
I
man.
just yeah, but anyway, I just I don't know why. Somehow I resonate with what you said there on in a different way, but how I in some ways I feel like the good thing that came out of it is that I did end up kind of staying away from a lot of things that I, otherwise may not have. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and I think I can relate to that too, because looking back at it, there definitely was a fear instilled in me of, like, I don't wanna go to hell. Like, I didn't know the
Mm.
love of the Father. My idea of God at that time was, a again, like, I have to earn my way to heaven, and
Yeah.
God's just this
Yeah.
huge guy that, sitting up there just waiting to kinda, like, smite me to hell after I screw up. And so I did have that fear, and when I finally did start reading the Bible and going to Bible studies and learning about the grace of God, again, I was just blown away. I'm just like, really? Like, this is who God is? Like, this is how much he
Wow.
loves
Yeah.
me? Like, even after all the things that I've done, all the hidden sins, like all the, bad thoughts that I've had and, things like that, that he still loves me. He still chooses
Mm.
me. It was mind-blowing, man, and I'm so thankful for his grace. I'm so thankful that, I actually have that relationship with God, that I am in relationship with God and not just in religion with God.
Mm. Man, that's so good. Yeah, it's so crazy, man, how we could just carry around just so much nonsense about God without realizing it and just thinking that it's what our Bible says. And then when we read the Bible through that lens, when we read the Bible through that lens that you have to do everything right or God's going to be mad at you or God's going to send you to hell or God's going to be disappointed, he's distant, he's angry. When we read the Bible through that kind of lens, we misinterpret so much of scripture to kind of fuel that thing, and we end up s- seeing what we I don't know if it's what we want to see, but we see what we're already convinced of. And it's so important, I think, to approach scripture from that place of God is my father and he loves me. And there are difficult passages of scripture. And there are passages that I, have wrestled with for years. And there's stuff that I read and I don't understand. And there's stuff that I'm like, how do, I have to kind of really allow the Holy Spirit to open things up to me. And sometimes it takes a very long time with certain passages that are like, how do I like how does this like how do I put these two things together, and so there are difficult passages of scripture. I get it, it's not all like touchy feely and it's not like every verse is saying that God loves you, but if we approach God, we approach his word from that lens of I am fully accepted by a God who loved me so much that he sent his son to die on a cross in my place so that I could be with him forever. Like, he's done everything for me, and the only reason that I'm even able to pick up this Bible and read it is because of his goodness and because of his grace, and kind of approaching him that way as opposed to, "Man, I gotta read this Bible or God's gonna be pissed at me," you know? Like,
Right.
it's so different, and I carried for so many years, man, and I'm sure I still do, but I carried for so many years just so much just nonsense and stuff that's not even true about the nature of God that really, negatively affected me and caused me to kinda keep or hold myself back, keep God at an arm's length or whatever, and yeah, man, so I appreciate what you're saying there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to taste and see that the Lord is good, right? Like, once you really get that
Yeah.
taste, of God's goodness and you see God's goodness, you don't want anything else, and it helps to approach Scripture in a different way, and knowing that it is living and it's breathing and it's active and alive, and the Holy Spirit wants to bring revelation to us, and it just makes it exciting. I mean, that's the awesome thing about the Bible, right? It's you're never gonna know all of it. You're never gonna, like, understand exactly everything, because it's, it can change based off the season of life and the revelations that the Holy Spirit wants to give you. So I love it, man.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, so I do want to circle back to some other stuff. So you mentioned that I guess struggling in your, I don't know if it was your childhood or teenage years, but struggling with some depression and struggling with eating disorders and stuff like that. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how that kind of how it started, how it came to pass, kind of what that was like, and then ultimately we'll get to how, God began to get a hold of you. I think you said when you were in your 20s is when you really started to build a relationship with God. So we'll have a testimony with Terry. Let's do it.
Hey, here we go. Yeah, I love it. So growing up, I dealt with a lot of anxiety. Anxiety definitely runs in my family. My mom was very anxious. My sisters, I'm pretty sure, have all dealt with anxiety. And I was also overweight as a kid. I remember second grade stepping on the scale, and it said that I was 100 pounds. And I remember looking at
Mm,
that. Even in my 7-year-old mind, I'm just like, whoa, this is not good. And I'd get bullied, I'd get made fun of, and it kind of carried out throughout my childhood. And then when I was like 13, 14, it was 13, my parents bought a treadmill. And especially in Minnesota, right? Like you can't really work outside in the middle of winter. So we got a treadmill, and I would start just going for little jogs on it every now and then. And like I felt good about myself. I'm just like, hey, like I'm
mm,
active, I'm moving. This feels pretty good. And so I just continued to do it more. And I don't know what it was, man, but I remember specifically, uh, getting the jug of chocolate milk out of the fridge. Like, I would always drink chocolate milk, and I remember looking at, like, the nutritional label with all the calories. I'm just like, "Whoa, like, this is not
hmm,
good." And that just spiraled severely into a deep, dark hole where I would look at the calories for everything, and,
mm,
it led to, like, substituting this for this. I remember eh, 8th grade telling my buddies at the lunch table, like, "Hey, did you know that McDonald's sweet and sour sauce actually has less calories than their barbecue sauce?" Like, it
mm.
was
Yeah, yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
Like, I was just going through, um, just everything, trying to basically eat le as few calories as possible, and then
Yeah.
that led to counting up the calories, adding them up throughout the day, and then making sure that I ran that exact number off on the treadmill. So essentially, I was like equaling everything out to 0 by the end of the day.
Wow.
And yeah, it was not good. And so that all started in like January 2004. By June of 2004, I had gone from 165 pounds to 116 pounds. And I mean, keep in mind,
Wow.
I'm a 13-year-old at this time. Like I'm in
Yeah.
puberty, I'm growing, I'm developing. Like I'm wreaking havoc on my body. And throughout that time, my family and people, they'd make comments like, "Hey, like, what's going on? You're losing weight. Like, are you okay?" And
Mm,
I did what everyone else with the eating disorder does, and I just lied through my teeth and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And it's so, I'm gonna say, demonic how eating disorders work, because when people would say that, it would actually fuel me to want to lose more weight. It was just like, "You think I look like skinny now? Just wait until you see
yeah.
me like next week. I'm gonna drop another couple pounds." It's just so demonic and twisted how that mindset is. And
Hmm.
on my 14th birthday, I was spending the night at my grandparents'. That was always a special treat during the summer. I'd go to my grandparents'. They had cable TV. We didn't, so I could watch, Nickelodeon and stuff like that. And they really just spoiled me. And I was sitting in the living room with my grandma just watching TV, and she looks over at me and she's like, "Terry, are you sure you're okay?" I'm like, "Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm fine, grandma. I'm fine." She let it go. Probably about 15 minutes passes, and then she kind of looks over again, like, "Are you sure you're okay, Terry?"
Hmm.
And that's when I lost it, man. Like, that's when
Wow.
I lost it. I just broke down sobbing.
Wow.
I was finally at a point where I was ready to admit that I don't wanna do this anymore. For a while, I did wanna do it. This was, again, in a demonic, twisted way, this was fun. How much weight can I
Hmm.
lose? How can I shape my body the way that I want it to? But man, it was just exhausting. I didn't wanna do it anymore. My day was consumed by, "When's the next time I can eat?" My dreams were all about, "Man, I wish I could go to a restaurant and have this meal there."
Wow.
It
Wow.
consumed my life, and I was just done, and I broke down crying, and my grandma called my mom, and the next day, they got me into a doctor, and that's when, I realized that, wow, I'm severely, like, malnourished here, just, again,
Hmm.
116 pounds. I'm basically skin and bones. I remember actually even passing out, at that doctor's appointment just 'cause I didn't really eat anything, and I just had no energy, and,
They got you there
that
just in time, huh?
yeah, yeah, I'm so thankful. I mean, I've always been close to my
Man.
grandparents, but man, if it wasn't for my grandma, and that connection that I had with her, I don't know if I'd be here. Because unfortunately,
Yeah.
that can be the case with eating disorders. Like, if you don't come to that realization, if you don't have people intervening in your life, you will die. Like, this leads to death because your mind is never gonna be satisfied with how you look.
Yeah.
Your mind is never gonna be satisfied with that number on the scale. It's always gonna push you to go further and further until you're dead. And so I'm super, just thankful for my grandma, intervening in that moment. I'm so thankful for my parents being willing to give me the treatment that I needed, and they tried to get me in with a therapist, and at that time, I didn't want therapy. Like, I thought it was pointless. I'm just like, I don't wanna talk about how I'm feeling and why I'm doing it. Like, I just
Hmm.
want a meal plan. I want people to tell me what should I be eating. And so I worked with a nutritionist and a dietitian. They got me set up with a meal plan. And so that was, again, June of 2004. By September of 2004, going back to school, I was in a better place. I wouldn't say I was fully recovered. I remember coming back to school and people, my classmates, still kind of making comments like, "Whoa, Terry, what happened to you over the summer?" But, things started to get better after that, and, um, then in college, skipping ahead to college, uh, again, just I think it was just stress. It was the stress of working, the stress of keeping up with grades, the stress of, like, figuring out what
Yeah.
do I wanna do with my
Yeah.
life, and food was the one thing I could control, and I think that's the big thing with eating disorders is that it comes down to control. Everything
Hmm.
around you may seem chaotic, but that's the
Yeah.
one thing you can control. And so that's what I started to do. I'm thankful that I started to realize it in that moment that, okay, I'm heading
Mm.
down this path. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this time I actually went to therapy and, man, that therapist just really helped me, just reframe my thoughts and help me to see things in a different way, and I'm super thankful for her, and that's honestly what kind of motivated me to really pursue therapy as a career for myself. And
Wow.
so, yeah, I know there's a lot there, so I don't know what parts you wanna unpack there, Duke.
Oh man, there's so many things. I appreciate you so much for just your openness and sharing. Maybe I'll work a little bit in reverse order with the things that kind of stuck out to me, and I'll probably forget to bring some things up, but it'll be okay because
Yep.
there's plenty of things to talk about. So, but you just mentioned the issue of control, and like when you're feeling like things are spiraling out of control around you and kind of gravitating toward that one thing that you feel like you can control, even if it's something that's very destructive, something that could be devastating for you. But it's so interesting the way that our mind will grab hold of things that are very, very destructive, but somehow they convince us that it's our comfort zone, that it's our safety zone. And I think that that's the issue with maybe all of the thing, like all of the, if we want to like boil down addictive behavior, I think I don't know about I shouldn't say all of it, but I think that a lot of it comes down to that issue of control. Because I think that that desire to be in control is something that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Like, even before that, like, I think it goes all the way back to, like, Lucifer being expelled from heaven. It's like that original kind of issue. We could say we could put pride there and some other things as well, I'm sure too, and call those the original issue as well. But, it was kind of like Adam and Eve in the garden, and they had everything that they could have ever wanted, and it was perfection, but there was this one thing that they didn't understand, and they just felt like they needed to know, like they didn't they it was like that issue of kind of trusting God with something that he didn't fully explain to them, that they didn't fully understand, and they weren't okay with that. And it's like this issue of being in control, having something, just as you were talking there about the eating disorder, I was just kind of thinking, yeah, I can kind of see the same sort of thought pattern develop in somebody who maybe starts cutting themselves or something like that, right? Where it's something that's so destructive, but at the same time, when you feel like everything is out of your control and things are going terrible and you don't know how to deal with it in a healthy way, it's kind of gravitating toward that thing that allows you to kind of feel that release for that moment. Cause I feel like feeling like you're in control is almost like a high. Like it's one of those things that just gives you a release of endorphins or whatever it is, but it just gives you a release of like I'm in control. Like I'm taking matters into my own hands right now. And I'm just wondering like is that kind of what you were alluding to as you made mention of that a moment ago?
Yeah, yeah, like I said, just that wanting to feel powerful, right? Like, again, I was
Yeah.
made fun of, throughout my childhood for being overweight, and I dealt with anxiety and things like that, and so to feel like I had some type of power and control in my life, like, just fueled the obsession and the addiction, and I think for me, once I was able to recognize and accept that at the end of the day, Terry, you really don't have control over a whole lot. That's when I started to get some freedom and healing on my journey with an eating disorder because I mean, if you look at it, Duke, we really aren't in control of a whole lot in this world, right? Like God is in control of it all. I tell people we generally always have control over our attitude, our behavior, and our work ethic. Like those are
Wow.
three things that we always should have a control. Those are three things that we have a choice in, regardless of what other people are doing or our circumstances. Like we still choose what's our response going to be in those three areas.
Mm,
And so once I was able to just find the freedom with not being in control and really just letting go and surrendering that over to Christ, that's when I got my healing. That's when I started to get breakthrough.
come on. And so on the eating disorder, like when you were a kid and you dropped all that weight in that, short period of time because you were counting your calories and you were burning them all off by running and all of that, did you like when you looked in the mirror, did you think that you were skinny? Like did you look at yourself and say, "Oh man, like I'm skinny," or like what was going on in your mind there that you and you did mention it a little bit, but what was kind of going on in your mind there that kept you just going further and wanting to keep going?
Yeah. No, I saw myself as fat still. And again, that's the distortion of the mind when you're
Yeah.
dealing with an eating disorder. I mean, you could see my ribs poking out through my stomach and I still thought I was fat. And
Hmm.
the goal was to just get a flat stomach. Like I just want a flat stomach. And until I got that, I wasn't gonna stop, and then, looking back at it now, even if I did have that, I wouldn't have stopped, it would've been something else, and so,
Hmm.
yeah, looking in the mirror, no, I didn't see skinny Terry, I didn't see skin and bones Terry, I
Right.
saw, "Hey, there's a little bit more fat that we need to get rid of."
I gotcha. Man, it's so twisted and it's so crazy that when you're a kid, when you're 10, 11, 12, or you're, in your early teen years or whatever, and you're going through, especially going through those like really formative years where a lot of things just in you are changing, a lot of things that you're not sure of. And then I think everything, the environment that you're in, where, kids around you are being exposed to more and more things, but on different levels. And some kids are, getting exposed to some very like hardcore things. And then you're just hearing about, you have friends that start talking to you about different things, right? They start talking to you whether it's about drinking or drugs or sex or whatever, or like, maybe pornography becomes an issue or like just whatever. But during that age period, it's like your mind is bombarded by so many different things. I don't know, did you mention was like bullying a factor at all for you? I can't remember if you mentioned that or not. I think you just said some kids were maybe calling you like fat or something, but was that a factor for you as well?
Yeah, in my younger years, like those,
Okay.
first few grades, definitely kind of bullied for my weight. I remember even as a sixth grader, there'd be a guy on the playground that would spit, in my face and on my head, because he didn't
Yeah,
like me,
yeah, yeah.
didn't like the way that I looked, and so yeah, that definitely dealt with some of that. When I got into intermediate school, seventh, eighth grade, wasn't really a whole lot of bullying there, but like you said, you're going through changes and that desire for like girls to like you that developed. And I always thought that, well, because I'm fat, no girl's gonna like me. And so that was the
Mm.
motivator too, as far as the whole dropping weight is, well, maybe if I, get down to a certain number, if I look a certain way, then maybe a girl will like me, and this is,
Yeah.
the eighth grade mind, right? And
Yeah.
man, looking back at it now, it's just like, yeah, it's just so twisted and distorted.
Yeah, and I guess what I was getting at, the reason I asked you that question is because there's there's so much there's just so much pressure going on in a mind of a kid who's like doesn't their mind's not developed yet. Like their brain's not developed yet. Their frontal lobe's not
Right,
developed yet. And it's like the all this extra weight and pressure beyond just like the normal like even if none of that was going on, there's still, the pressure of like maybe you want to do good in school or maybe you want to do good at a sport you're doing or whatever, kind of like the almost like the healthy pressures of life, right? But then you had all these other things, and then in some cases, thankfully this wasn't the case for you, but in some cases, you add in, all these extra pressures that come from the home so many times. Maybe you're being beat up at home or you're not being looked after, or you're in a broken home situation. And I just think, man, like young people are just so under attack from so many different areas, and how we could like be living in close proximity to people, and with adults too, for sure. But like how we could be living in such close proximity to people that have so much going on. Like they feel like they're literally carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And like at any minute, it could just completely collapse and not even know it though. Like we could be so close to people that we don't even know. Like we don't know what's going on when they get home from school. We don't know what kind of anxieties and pressures and things like that they're dealing with. And so I think that what you do as a therapist, as a marriage and family therapist, is so important. It's so key. And I love that you said that even some of like the struggles that you had and how eventually God broke you out of it, and how that played a factor in kind of why you're so passionate about what you do today in this field, and just wanting to see people walking in freedom, walking in victory, living healthy lives. And it's so key. But I feel like, is this the case, Terry? Still, I feel like in the church that there really can be such a kind of like a stigma attached to the therapy thing. Probably in all of life, but I feel like anyway more so in the church, and kind of like this idea of, if I go to therapy, then I'm first of all, I'm admitting that something's wrong with me, and so that makes me feel weak. Kind of like that's kind of like maybe the base level of it. But then also, what are other people going to think of me if I do this? Then they're going to know that things are not all together. And I think that people that, I mean, it's not. Let me just say this: to admit that you have a problem, to admit that you have a struggle, takes so much strength. It
yeah.
takes so much courage. And that's usually, they say that's the first step to recovery, right? But it's also probably, I mean, in many, many cases, it's probably the hardest step to take, because it's like literally changing the direction of your life without having the answers. It's kind of like making that initial decision. There's going to be a ton, like tons of smaller, of like daily decisions and smaller decisions that are going to help you eventually get to that place that you want to be, to completely walk in freedom. right? But it's kind of like that initial, like, big decision where I'm actually making a decision without knowing how to do it to turn my life from this direction to a completely opposite direction. It takes so much courage, but yet there's such a stigma, I think, attached to it, and people look at it as something that, "Oh, if I gotta take my family to therapy, I gotta admit that I need couples counseling," or, whatever it is, then I feel like that's a weakness. And I wish that we could flip that switch in our minds and in culture and in society to be like, no, like, that's what we all need it at some point in our lives, right? And
Yep.
instead of it's such a burden to carry around these things and to not be open and honest about how we feel and what's really going on, and the struggles and the battles that are going on in our mind. And it's a good thing, and it actually shows character and resiliency and courage and all these good things when you're actually willing to say, I don't have this all together and I need help. So I'm just curious, and then we'll get into some other stuff, like, from your perspective as a marriage and family therapist, do you see that as a real thing, as a real problem? The just that stigma that's so often, particularly in church settings, but however you want to, tackle that. What does that look like to you from your perspective as someone who works in this field?
Yeah, I think the stigma is definitely still there, inside the church and outside the church. I'm super blessed where I actually kind of work with my local church. I'm sitting in one of their offices right now, and they're
That's
actually
awesome.
having me speak on Sunday about mental health. And so I love that they are wanting to be more informed about mental health. But I think the stigma is definitely still there. I mean, I even have parents bringing their teenagers to see me, and they'll tell me straight up that we don't want to do this. We don't want our kid on medication. We're only here because, the school recommended it or whatever. Like, never because the kid said they wanted it, even though they're wanting it. That there's still some resistance there, and there's still some of that stigma there. And man, I equate mental health to like physical health. If you had something wrong with you physically, you'd go into a doctor to get it checked out. At least most people would, right? If you got something wrong mentally, emotionally, it's okay to go in and get that checked out too.
Mm,
It all falls under that health umbrella. And so, yeah, I
yeah.
think we're making strides. I think that that stigma is continuing to erode, but it's definitely still there. I see that all the time. And man, it's so cool when I have a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old client come in and sit down, and for the first time ever in their life, they're actually talking about what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Mm,
I'm the first person they're talking about that, "Hey, I was sexually abused as a kid. I
hmm,
was, physically abused by my dad," or whatever it is, and you can just kinda see that like that weight lifted off their
yeah.
shoulder as they show that courage, like you said, in not being ashamed and not hiding it, but bringing it to light. And I think, especially as Christians, it's so important to bring these things to light. When we just stuff it and keep it in the darkness, that's exactly where the enemy wants it. He wants us to stay hidden and to be ashamed and to feel that embarrassment so that we're kind of in bondage to it. But
Mm.
by simply talking about it and bringing it to light, man, that's I almost feel like that's half the battle. You just gotta talk about it, and like you said, that takes courage, but you can do it. There's tons of people who are gonna be willing to listen to you and to help you. You just gotta take that first step.
Amen. And Terry, what do you think is or should be the role of the church when it comes to helping people through mental health issues and things of that nature? And when I say the church, I literally mean, I don't mean just like the body of Christ. I mean like the actual churches where people go, like the community that you're a part of. What do you think is that role? Like, I know, I mean, not every church is going to have a licensed therapist or mental health counselor like on staff or something like that. But what do you think, in general, the role of the church should be in the lives of people when it comes to helping them walk through mental health issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is they need to be educated. We live in a world where we really don't have an excuse to not be educated on this stuff. It's
It's
so
true.
prevalent, and with everything online, like, it's so easy to, whether it's a YouTube video or a research article, or you can, take an online training, whatever it is, like, we need to be educated. And like you said, that doesn't mean that all the pastors need to become, like, licensed or anything like that, but to just have, like, a basic knowledge of what mental health is. I've heard horror stories from other people where when they approach their pastor for, like, help, they go straight to, well, what kind of sin are you doing? Or,
Mm.
what kind of demonic activity were you exposed to? Or they keep it hush hush, like, well, we don't want the whole church to find out about this, right? And it just kind of perpetuates that stigma. And so I think the first step is really just being aware, and educating yourself that this is a thing. This is a thing that people in your congregation are dealing with. Like you mentioned earlier, Duke, they may be putting on that face, and you would have no idea on the outside that they're struggling. But I guarantee you, there's someone in your church inside who's struggling mightily, and they need someone. And then I think just even having, like, a list of resources ready for people, having a list of people within your area, within your community. Hey, these are some therapists, these are some psychiatrists, these are some groups even that you can go to get help, to help point people in the right direction. I think those are two major steps, and I think pretty easy steps that, pastors and churches all across America should be doing.
Amen. That's awesome. And as a believer, do you think that it's important for believers to see Christian counselors and therapists, or do you think they just need to see somebody that can help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really depends on the person. I mean, God will and does use anyone, right? And so I think it's really up to the person. I get a lot of people that want to come to me because they know I'm a Christian and I'm going to incorporate faith into my counseling. I'm going to talk about that. There is a spiritual component to this. Obviously, there's, a biological component and environmental factors and relational factors. There's also a battle going on in the spiritual realm right now over your
Mm,
mental health. And so we'll talk about that. The number one determining factor of if therapy is going to be successful is the relationship between the client and the therapist. So I guess that's what I would encourage people is, whether they're a Christian or not, if you have a good relationship with that person, if you feel comfortable opening up to them, if you feel like the therapy is helpful, if you feel like, I mean, even if you're not seeing a Christian therapist, if you feel like the advice they're giving you still falls in line with, like, a biblical perspective of things, then by all means keep seeing that person. It's really that fit between the client and the therapist that's really going to decide how successful is therapy.
hmm. Oh, that man. Yeah, that that was awesome. I appreciate your perspective on that for sure. How important is actually let me ask you like this. As the body of Christ, right? Like we're supposed to walk with people. Like we're supposed to be willing to walk with people through challenges and to through things that they're going through. And obviously there are times where, there's something that's like beyond beyond it's beyond you just need a friend right now. Like it's beyond you just need a friend to stand with you and walk through this. Like I'm willing to be your friend and to walk with you through this. But I also think that you should go see my buddy Terry because he's like legit. Like he knows what he's doing and he can really help you with this, or to go see a therapist, go see a mental health counselor, go see a psychiatrist, whatever the case may be, right? Um, but in that walking with people through some messy issues and things like that, I think that there's that to an extent, all of us in the body of Christ, we should kind of be willing at least to learn like how to better be present with people and how to better walk with people through those kinds of things. You mentioned a moment ago, like I can listen to you, and just that word, listening really stuck out to me. How important is listening, and how can we just in daily life with people that we're walking life with, how can we learn to be better listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it comes down to active listening. There's a difference between listening and active
Yeah.
listening. We live in a society where we almost listen to respond. We don't listen to understand.
Right,
And
right.
that's what I would encourage people is listen to understand. Actively listen, like focus on what are they saying? What are not even what they're saying, but what is their face saying? What is their
Yeah.
body saying? Like pay attention to those cues as well. And be willing to not feel like you have to fix the problem. I feel like so many people, especially us as
Mm,
men, we're kind of wired to be like problem fixers. If they got a problem, we can fix it. And if being married to my beautiful wife for 10 years has taught me anything, is that 9.9 times out of 10 when she comes to me with a problem, she doesn't want me to fix it. She just wants me to just listen and
yeah.
support and to acknowledge that it makes sense why she's feeling that way, to validate. And I think that's the key of it all too, is to validate that person. You may not
Mm,
understand where
it's
they're
good.
coming from. You may not agree with what they're saying, but to validate them, and validation can be something as simple as I can see why you feel that way, or that makes sense. If I was in your shoes, I'd probably feel that way too. It's just that statement of acknowledgement that helps that other person know that, okay, it's not just me. I'm not, I'm not crazy. I'm
Mm,
not alone in this. Someone gets me. And so,
yeah.
yeah, man, actively listening to people. Listen with the intent to understand instead of to respond.
Mm. Sorry, Terry, I didn't hear what you said because I was just thinking about what I was gonna say. No, I'm just I'm just
Well,
joking.
let's practice some active listening
But
here,
that's
Duke.
what it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, that's what it is. Like, I feel like in conversation, a lot of times we're only maybe hearing, I don't know, 50, 60% of what the person is saying because we're already kind of like formulating our response.
Yep.
And just to be very honest, that's something as a host of a show like this, like it's something that I think about a lot, and it's something that I'm trying to get better at because well, first of all, I don't think, and I'm not putting myself down. I don't think I'm naturally a very good listener, so I have to work at it. And I can get distracted. Like I can be talking to somebody and I can very easily kind of hone in on one thing that they said and then kind of miss out on other stuff. And sometimes just for the sake of my own growth, like I'll go back and I'll listen to like a podcast episode and I'm like, I totally missed. Like I didn't even hear that. Like, I didn't even hear that they said that because they said one thing and then my mind went to that. And then I'm trying to listen. Like I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm trying to also, not forget what they said because I know I want to come back to it. So there's like a lot of stuff going on up there, and so that's something that I actively work on because I want to become a better listener. I know that it's so important. And so often I think that listening to somebody, like if we would make it less about, now I mean now I'm not talking about podcasting anymore, just talking about being in life with somebody
Yeah.
who's maybe opening their heart to you or telling you about something. I mean, what we say the most important thing, or is it more important that we're just present with them?
I think it's both, but I think to start off with, yeah, it's definitely more important to just be present with that person. If they're coming to talk to you about something, just listen. Again, you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to fix the
Yeah.
person's problem. I think back to Job. When God took everything away from Job, his three buddies came, and for a week they just sat there with him. Like, they
Yeah,
didn't
right.
talk. They just
Mhm.
sat there with him. It wasn't until they actually started talking that they kind of, like, started to dig a hole for themselves, right? Because they just
Yeah.
started accusing Job of, "What sin did you do?" Right? So, I mean, yes, definitely it's important what we say. Words have power, but when people are coming to us, I wouldn't focus on what you're saying. I would focus on just being present with that person. And
Mm.
and that can be just sitting in silence and looking at them, maintaining eye contact with them, could be just laying a hand on like their knee as they're talking or wrapping them around your arms as they're talking. Sometimes that is the most powerful thing that you can do,
Yeah.
and that would
Yeah.
mean so much more than talking.
Yeah. Well, because I think a lot of times when we talk, we make it about us. Like, we kinda make it about, like, "Oh, that was a really good point I just had there," you know?
Yep.
But the other thing that you said, a word that you mentioned that's I think is so important as well, which goes along with listening, is you use the word reassuring, and how important it is sometimes just to reassure somebody. And, I think for example, as a parent, I have my oldest son just turned 12,
Wow.
and so it's getting into the crazy years, right? It like
Yeah.
just kind of getting into some stuff, and he's been talking since the beginning of this school year. He's been talking about how, he's got a lot of anxiety and all this kind of stuff. And um, there's been times where my thought my thought has been I'm not saying specifically with this, but just different things where my kids have come to me with stuff, and where my initial thought is to just be like, just get over it. Like just stop. Like it's you know, and and sometimes that might be what they need to hear, like, sometimes depending on what it is, but I've looked back on some of the things that I've said and done, and I've said, "You know what? Like, that was actually really insensitive, and I should have recognized that, like, my child coming to me with something, it was an opportunity for me to let them express themselves, at the very least, to let them know that it's okay to have emotions, to let them know that it's okay to feel what they're feeling. And so often I think we can approach people from our perspective of like what works for me, or we can approach people from, even just from that thing where we can kind of be indifferent because we just want them to be better, and maybe we can't put ourselves in their shoes to understand why they're feeling what they're feeling, and it might not make sense to us. Like, if you have no idea I almost said the theology, the psychology behind why somebody would cut themselves, you could look at that person and just be very insensitive and be like, well, just stop. Like,
Right.
you just don't have to do that. You know what I mean? And we can just kind of dismiss things that people are dealing with. And you alluded to this earlier. You mentioned, sometimes in the church that's the kind of thing that has happened to people, or they go to a leader, or they go to a parent, or whatever, and it's just kind of their emotional struggle, or the issue that they're dealing with is kind of brushed away as, well, you just need to pray harder, or you just need to stop doing something that you're doing, or, kind of making it about this like over spiritualized thing, rather than being willing to get down on that level with them and to love them and to be Jesus to them in that moment when, recognizing, okay, there's like some brokenness here. There's something going on here. And even if I don't fully understand it, like, maybe maybe I can partner with the Holy Spirit to to just, as you said, to listen. And then I think listening as well, like listening to what the person is saying, listening maybe to what they're not saying even, and also listening to the Holy Spirit and what he would say. Like, maybe he's just leading you to it, just, dude, just shut up, like, don't say anything.
Right.
Or, like, you know
Right.
what I mean? It's like that kind of thing where, yeah, I feel like there's times like that where I'm about to kind of put my own thoughts out there for this person because I wanna help. Like, I legitimately wanna help, but the Holy Spirit's like, "Don't. Just don't. Just
Yep.
don't make this about you, because it's not about you, it's about this person."
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, I think people tend to have a habit of just talking about themselves, and I've had man, I've lost count of how many people that I've had come into my office where they said, "Well, I tried talking to this person, I tried talking to my friend or my parents," but then they just kinda started talking about themselves and how they dealt,
Wow.
with the same thing, and then it became about them, and then, that kind of turns that person off from wanting to open up anymore because it's just like, "Well, no one's actually gonna listen to me." They're just gonna make it about themselves. And so,
Wow.
yeah, again, just sitting and listening, and if need be, asking questions. Like, it's okay to ask questions to gather like more information, or if you're kind of confused on something, asking questions and asking them in a way where it's just like, hey, can you tell me more about this? Or I was a little confused about this. Can you maybe speak to that more? Instead of questions
Mhm.
like, well, why are you doing that? Or what are you thinking? Like those
Yeah.
dismissive,
Yeah.
insensitive questions. Like, again, and I feel like that's another skill in and of itself, is knowing how to ask questions.
Mm.
It's not my dad drilled this into my mind growing up, but it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Right. And so being mindful, being able to have that EQ, the emotional intelligence,
Yes.
to kind of read the room, read the person, and match the affect and the behavior needed for that situation, right?
That's
And
good.
it just takes time. It takes mindfulness on our parts. We need to be intentional of doing that, because again, our human nature is to just make it about ourselves and do what we think is right. And yeah, I love what you said about, yeah, just checking in with the Holy Spirit. I mean, he's the ultimate helper, right? He will let you know what are you supposed to do in this moment, and maybe what he's telling you to do makes you feel uncomfortable, but trust him.
Hmm.
Be obedient with it anyways.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, Terry, I don't know. I didn't ask you how much time you have. So are we up against the clock on your end, or
I got all day, man.
can I keep going?
Yeah, we're good.
Because I did want to circle back to one other thing, man. You mentioned growing up and having a lot of anxiety as a kid and throughout your teenage years and stuff like that. I'm just curious what that looked like for you.
So a lot of it was being away from my mom. I was a kid who I was, eh, especially when I was really young, like I always wanted to kind of be like in proximity of my mom. And, as a therapist now, it's interesting going back and like kind of like analyzing, oh yeah, why was that? And I think,
Yeah.
for me, I just needed that reassurance, that I was needing. Like for me, that was like a form of love. That was the love that I needed, is just the reassurance that I'm here,
Mm.
that I'm not leaving, that things are okay. I mean, whatever it was in that situation. But man, I dealt with a ton of anxiety. I remember like fourth grade even, on Wednesdays, I think at like 1 o'clock. School would get out at
Mhm.
like 3 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, some of the kids would be bussed over to the Catholic school in town, which wasn't by the jail. And they would spend the last couple hours there doing Catholic school. And I would get so anxious that they wouldn't be bussed back to our class by the end of the day, because if they weren't, then I'm not going to be able to get on the bus on time. I'm going to be late. I'm not going to be able to go
Oh,
home
okay.
and see my mom, and my
Yeah.
mind would just go carry on, all those different ways. And so, yeah, man, I think for me it was just I needed a lot of reassurance, and I don't know if it was like, maybe if I felt like I wasn't getting that from my parents or from teachers or from people in general. But I think for me, that's kind of what that anxiety looked like, where I would just worry. And yeah, I would have crying spells in school. I would have
Hmm.
even crying spells in like, religion classes Wednesday nights. Like, oh, what if my mom doesn't come and pick me up? Or what if my dad doesn't
Wow.
pick me up at this time? And like, my parents are great people. Like they never like not, did that stuff. And so it was just an irrational thought. It was an irrational worry. And it was something that I struggled with probably, up until high school when I was going through the eating disorder stuff. I kind of addressed the anxiety that way. And man, again, I'm just thankful to the Holy Spirit that I'm not an anxious person for the most
Hmm.
part nowadays. Do I have times of anxiety? Yeah, because I'm human, but I don't live in that place anymore. Like, I feel like
That's
God's
awesome.
definitely delivered me from that. And so, yeah, that's kind of what the anxiety looked like for me.
Man, that's awesome that you said that the outcome of the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit delivering you from that. Um, I'm self-conscious now about making this about me. But I relate because I grew up as a kid. I just was like constantly afraid. I was constantly I had this just huge fear in me of somebody close to me dying. I remember like just about every night, man, I would be afraid. Like if my dad was a few minutes late getting home from work or something, or on those nights where it'd be raining around the time where dad's supposed to be coming home from work, my grandma would pick me up from school some days, and if she wasn't there, when school got out, it was just like all this stuff, and my mind immediately went to today's the day, like
Mm,
tragedy struck. You know what I mean? Like I would kind of like have like fantasize about a phone call coming in and just like devastating news, and it was just this just intense fear to the point that I mean I was afraid of everything, man, as a kid. Like I remember at nighttime I would if I woke up during the middle of the night and everyone else was asleep, there was no way I was going back to sleep until the sun started coming up. There was just something in me that was so afraid of the nighttime. I would hear like all the little noises in the house. I would get up, dude. I'd get up, I'd get out of bed, and I would like go and check stuff out, make sure the doors were still locked and no one had come in. Like, just like I had that all the time, and I always felt like even I was afraid to really be around people, especially like bigger kids, for a long time. Once I started kind of when I got into high school and I started playing sports, and so I was like a freshman and I was kind of mixed in with juniors and seniors, like I kind of started to break out of it a little bit more. But I was always afraid, like as a kid, I was always afraid to be around like high school kids because I just always thought they were going to be mean or they were going to. And honestly, they never really were. I mean, they were, they weren't always nice, but it wasn't. I don't really even have a experience to look back on to say like this is why it's like this. But there's something about there's something about the way that we can kind of just trick ourselves or kind of trick our minds to perceiving something that is not it's not reality, but it becomes our reality because we've perceived it that way. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
it's yeah, I mean, it's like the acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real.
Appearing real. Yeah.
That's what anxiety
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And
You know, and
you yeah, go ahead.
as you're talking about your experience, like, it's kind of like bringing revelation to me. It's cool how the Holy Spirit's working even just through this, interview, Duke. Like, looking back at it, I think, the root of anxiety for me was probably just the fear of being alone. And, again,
Mm,
like, I don't have any memories of, like, being alone, like any traumatizing memories. And I mean, in
yeah.
fact, as I got a little older, like I liked my solitude. I kind of liked being alone, but I think there was just I think what it came down to was just the insecurity and not having the confidence in myself that I could take care of myself, that I'm going to be okay on my own.
Mm,
I
yeah.
think that's really what it
Yeah.
stemmed down to for me.
Yeah. Hmm. Another thing that just occurred to me is I don't know. I mean, of course, God knows our end from the beginning, and I love what God says in the first chapter of Jeremiah when He's calling Jeremiah, and He says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." And I think that that's interesting because it's like God knew him before He formed him, and so He formed him. He formed us. He created us, He designed us based on what He knew about us. So He knows us perfectly, intricately, and based on that, that's how He forms us, He fashions us. It's like that picture of a potter, with the clay and bringing that thing into shape, bringing that thing to life, and that's how God has created and designed us. Now, I don't know to what extent the enemy knows about God's plan for our lives from like the beginning. I don't know. But one thing that I do see consistently with people is that, the enemy is always going to attack at the area of, where your greatest anointing lies, you know? And so it's interesting you just mentioned kind of, that part of your mind that was under attack and, how God you developed a relationship with God and you have experienced freedom in your life to now you're in this place where you get to help other people, walk through and experience freedom. And the enemy is always going to attack, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm weak there. What it might mean is that, this is actually this is actually, like, something that God has called me and destined me to do, to be, to become, and the reason why I'm actually struggling so much with this area of my life is because there's someone out there that's terrified of me becoming who God created me to be, and so they're trying
Exactly.
to, stop it and whatever. So, yeah, as you were talking, I kinda saw that, scenario playing out a little bit.
Yeah, dude, you just brought the fire there. I mean, yeah, that's all true. I mean, the enemy attacks what he fears most about us, right?
Yeah, it's
And I
good.
think
It's good.
ultimately he fears us coming into the fulfillment of those plans and of the destiny God has for us. And yeah, I mean, I've seen that in my life, attacking whether it's my identity or my peace or whatever it is, that's what he's going to go after. And so I love what you said there, that it doesn't mean that that's a weakness. It means that that's actually maybe your calling, and that's why you're so
Mm,
attacked with it. And so I would just encourage anyone out there that if you feel like you're being attacked in a specific area right now, whatever it may be, whether it's
mhm.
a relationship with someone or an illness or just your thoughts or your identity or whatever it may be, I'd really encourage you to just kind of sit and pray and kind of get a word from the Holy Spirit to see, is that, is he actually calling you out of that?
Mm,
Is he actually going to be using that area of you being attacked as part of like what you're going to be used to bring people to know him in the future? I'm not wording this
yeah.
well at all, but
No, you're on
um
it, man.
the weakness may actually be your anointing, is basically what I'm
Yes.
trying to say. And man, how amazing is it that we serve a God that he takes the parts where maybe we feel weak or
Yep.
unqualified or unequipped, and that's what he uses. And I mean, scripture
Yeah.
is full of examples of that. It's just amazing.
That's so good, man. Bro, I appreciate you so much, man. I appreciate your time and for having this conversation with me. And I think that it's really, really going to be helpful and impactful for the people that get a chance to listen. And yeah, man, just thanks again for joining me. I want to make sure that we point some people to your podcast first of all, and then any other places that might be a good idea to point some people. But you have your podcast, Testimonies with Terry. And man, by the way, so I was able to I listened to the episode you did with Trevor Tyson, and I listened to the episode you did with George A. Wood. Man, that was a good conversation. And I'm not just saying this like because you're on the podcast, but like I really enjoy what you do and how you do it. I think you ask really great questions. I think you're a really great interviewer, and I'm just like listening to you like, oh yeah, I gotta like taking notes on like how to ask better questions and stuff like that. Because I really do think that the way that you ask your questions, you give people a real chance to express themselves and for them to tell their story. And I just, I love it. I think it's a great atmosphere for learning and for growing and a real atmosphere for just becoming more aware of some of the things that you are, whether intentionally, unintentionally, or whatever, but the things that you're drawing attention and awareness to in your podcast episodes through these conversations and testimonies that come out. So I think it's a big deal, man, and I think you're doing a great job. And I think that everybody should check out the podcast Testimonies with Terry. What would be a good way to point some people to that?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for those kind words. It's man, it's just a privilege to be, given a platform and to be used by God in this way to just share stories of hope. Uh, you can find Testimonies with Terry wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. This season I started doing the video versions as well, so you can find it on YouTube. I believe the YouTube
Nice.
channel is TW Terry Pod. That's also where you can find me on Instagram, TW Terry Pod. And then I have a Facebook page as well, Testimonies with Terry. I love interacting with people. That's kind of
Yeah.
been a goal from the start. Is I want there to be almost kind of like this relationship between me and all the listeners, and that's why I love having the guests do like the follow-up questions, or the Q&A videos that they do. They answer questions that listeners
Yeah.
send in, and I just love it. I love it being just kind of this relational thing where you are part of the pod, right? And so check it out. I'd love to connect with you guys, and I hope that you're blessed by the testimonies that you listen to.
Love it, man. That's very cool that you do that. That's a really cool thing. I saw some of those on your Instagram, and yeah, the Q&As after the fact that's super cool. I love that's a very cool format. So yeah. Um, are you more comfortable on in the interviewer chair or being the guest, or it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's a good question. I haven't done a whole lot of interviews. The more that I'm doing, the more like confident I feel like I'm becoming. But I'd probably say right now I'm more confident and comfortable being the interviewer just because
Hmm.
it's essentially what I do for my job all day too, right? Like I'm asking people questions. And so really hosting the podcast is kind of an extension of my job. I'm not doing therapy, obviously, with the guests, but
Right.
just kind of that similar style and approach. So yeah, I'd still say probably the interviewer chair is where I'm most comfortable at for now.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm gonna start to wind this down and let you go. But before we do that, would you share what you've shared today, man? Is honestly, it's been very encouraging, and I appreciate you listening to the Holy Spirit even throughout this conversation, and how you've been answering questions and stuff. Just before we go, though, like, what's one more thing that you would just say to somebody who is, dealing with something? Maybe they're dealing with some of that anxiety or fear that we talked about, or maybe that's, something that's manifesting in their life in a different way, whether it's through, self-harm or through some other kind of just harmful behavior, or just some kind of a mental health struggle or something like that. That's an extremely broad question, because there's a vast spectrum there. But I mean, what's just some final thought of encouragement that you would give to somebody who's just out there struggling and maybe does feel alone or doesn't know exactly how to go forward?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that there is help out there. Like even though it may feel like you're just going to struggle with this the rest of your life or that you're going to stay this way, doesn't mean that you're actually going to stay that way or feel that way. Like there is help out there. And I think even being very mindful of the words that you use to talk about yourself as you're struggling.
Mm,
I call clients out on this pretty much, every day where they say like, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm traumatized. And I'm just like, I don't I don't think that that's your identity. I think that's how you're
yes.
feeling, but that's not your identity. And so I always tell people like, phrase it that way. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious. Like don't take on
Yeah.
those illnesses, those struggles as your identity. Don't claim
Yeah.
what was never supposed to be yours. Right? We're supposed to
Mm,
live on earth as it is in heaven. That means we live from heaven to earth, not earth to heaven, and there
come
is
on.
no anxiety, there is no depression in heaven. Unfortunately, in this fallen world that we live in, there is, but it's just a struggle that we go through. It's not who we are. So be
Yes.
careful of how you're speaking about yourself, of the power that you're giving to whatever it is that you're struggling with, and seek out help. There are so many good therapists out there. There are so many resources out there to get help and to get healing and breakthrough. The enemy wants you to feel like you are just going to be stuck in this and that there is no hope, that you're never going to change. That is a lie from the pit of hell. We need to rebuke that in the name of Jesus Christ, and we need to go after the healing and the restoration that only the Holy Spirit can bring.
Woo. Come on, man. That was so good. That was so good. 100,000% on board with everything you just said. Um, man, I want to jump in and keep going, but I feel like that's just a very, very beautiful way to end this episode. I appreciate you again, man, and thank you for your time and being here with me today and having this conversation. And on a broader scale, thank you for what you're doing to help people just experience freedom and to experience healing and to see families and lives and relationships restored. It's obviously so needed. And thank you for what you're doing to bring awareness and advocacy to the area of mental health in general with your podcast and through the other things that you do. And to kind of being part of the conversation that is helping to diminish that that stigma that is attached to it. Because as long as people, as long as we allow the enemy to trick us into thinking that it's a shameful thing to admit where we are, whether we're aware of the enemy or not, but to live under that stigma of shame that's so often associated with the things that honestly on some level we're all dealing with it. On some level we're all dealing with something that we would probably much rather keep bottled up and not let anybody else know about. But the freedom that comes from just being able to talk with somebody, to be honest and open and vulnerable about the things that you're struggling with and what you're going through. Obviously, you don't need to talk to everybody about it, but you need to talk to somebody. And there's people out there that would love to talk to you, and um, you're worth it. I mean,
Amen.
the dream of God for your life is worth you going through this going through the pain. And I know that it's painful to admit, it's painful to give up that sense of control, it's painful to surrender that, and it's not an easy thing to do. But it's it doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong, it makes you courageous. And your life and who you are and the incredible future and destiny that God has for you is just so worth it. It's so
Amen.
worth taking those steps to reach out to somebody because, yeah, you're
Yeah.
valuable. And I love that you went there, man, on the identity piece. It's it's everything, man. I think it's what's missing from so much of life. It's yeah, it's like if we could just see ourselves even just a tiny fraction of the way that God sees us. If you could see yourself as just a tiny fraction of how valuable God thinks that you are, and that he created you out of that, like he created you out of that passion for you because your life matters that much to an all-knowing, perfect, loving God who just loved you that much that he wanted to create you, and he wanted you to be here so that he could spend eternity with you. Like, man, if we could just remember that, man. I feel like when we're going through nonsense and we just allow so much stuff, we just carry stuff around for so long, and it's just so not worth it. Because first of all, we've got a God out there that just he loves us so much and he wants us to be free. And and I think so much of that freedom, that he's designed it this way to be in community. And so the fact, I know I just keep this conversation going, but the fact that there is such a stigma and there is so much shame attached to this, it's such a scheme of the devil, and it goes
Yes.
against the nature of God. Like, God isn't like, no, you got to be stronger than this, you got to be like that. No, in your weakness his power is perfected. Like,
Yes.
in your
Amen.
weakness, he's made even stronger. And so I don't know if there's someone that needs to hear this or not, man, or if I'm just, whatever, but if I'm just ranting, I think maybe there's someone that needs to hear this. But just, your life is so valuable, and your life is so worth taking those steps to just get the help that you need on whatever level that might be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I always tell clients that we only get one of you. right? Like
Hmm.
God even with twins and triplets or whatever, like they are still uniquely different. There's only one of you, and once you're
Yeah.
gone from the world,
Yeah.
we're never getting that back. You have
Mm.
gifts, you have talents, you have opinions and thoughts that this world needs because we're never going to get that at any other time in history. And so, yeah, to just know that God has so much bigger plans for you than you could ever dream, regardless of what your circumstances are right now,
Yeah.
allow him to prove himself faithful. That's what
Amen.
he's going to do. That's his part. Your part is to just surrender. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to allow yourself to be weak.
Yes. Come on. Whew. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I pray that this conversation that it blessed you, maybe challenged you, maybe challenged the way that you think, or yeah, something brought some kind of value to your life. I'm sure that it did because I know for me, I was very, very encouraged, and appreciate Terry so much for his time, and appreciate you guys for checking out this episode. Yeah, if you would like to show some love to the podcast, you can do that by subscribing, by sharing, or by leaving a review or a comment or something like that. Appreciate that so much. And again, Terry, thank you, brother.
Hey, thank you. This was awesome, and I'm looking forward to having you on my podcast. We gotta get that together.
Yeah, let's do it, man. And we'll do this again someday again. We'll do this again. Oh, wait, hang on. I think I'm out of words. I think I've spoken all the words I can speak for
It's
now. We
Friday,
will
right?
do this again for sure someday soon.
Hey,
Because
looking forward
again,
to it,
man,
man.
yeah, it is Friday. That's my excuse. All right. Thanks again, brother.
Thank you, man.
Bye, everybody.